Greetings, co-panelists, the audience and the presenters of this conference. I'm Nicholas Idris ERAMEH, a PhD candidate of the Department of Political Science, University of Ibadan. I'm presenting a paper entitled Responsibility to Protect Electoral Violence and Regime Change in Africa. Since the global wave of democracy in the world, including Africa, elections have become more competitive, especially in Africa. For Huntington, between the periods of 1970, since the global wave of democracy in the world, including Africa, elections have become more competitive, especially in Africa. For Huntington, between the periods of 1974 and 1990, at least 30 countries made transition to democracy, just about doubling the number of democratic governments in the world. Since then, African elections have become more competitive. However, since the global wave of democracy in the world, including Africa, elections have become more competitive, especially in Africa. For Huntington, between the periods of 1974 and 1990, at least 30 countries made transition to democracy, just about doubling the number of democratic governments in the world. Since then, African elections have become more competitive. However, within the democratic space of competitiveness in these elections, it has always come with some other challenges. More pronounced is the issue of election and electoral violence in Africa. Take, for example, in Kenya 2007, in Zimbabwe 2008, in Nigeria 2011, and Cote d'Ivoire 2010. They were all instances of election and election violence that have marred the election process. Cote d'Ivoire, a country known for relative stability, politically and economically, was almost thrown into another round of civil war in 2010 following a disputed election between the president, Laurent Gbagbo, and his main challenger, Alassane Ouattara. In what could be seen as a disputed election in the runoff elections, the then president lost election through the ballot box, but refused to relinquish power to the acclaimed winner. And in his usual styles, his soldiers unleashed mayhem on civilians, which almost threw the country into another range of civil war. With all efforts to persuade him, both at the regional and international level, which proved abortive, the international community had to intervene in the crisis through the instrumentality of the responsibility to protect. However, before dealing about the whole issues or the body of content, there's a need to conceptualize what election violence is and what election violence is not. Election violence is a subset of political violence. Yes, it has several distinct features. For example, scholars like Strauss-Taylor, 2012, Hoagland, 2010, James Fisher, 2002, Herbert, 2007, and Willis, 2007, have all talked about what election violence is in terms of conceptualizations. Why the literatures on election violence could be succinctly split into three. Majorly, we have, for example, scholars like Brady, 1998, Fisher, 2002, Greve and Gomo, 2005, they emphasize the relevance of elections in growing democracy. While scholars like Leon, 2002, Relling, 2006, on their own part, raise objections to the roles election can or could play in conflict management. On the other hand, Odofin and Omojua, 2007, Ogayon, 2008, Agubama, 2008, have concerned themselves with the role political elites play in electoral conflict. This study, or this paper, benefits largely from John Gatton's theory of structural violence, I think consequentialist ethical political theory, which was used to explain the work. Now, to the body of the work, the responsibility to protect and the Cote d'Ivoire crisis. The responsibility to protect is a doctrine that resonated as a time-honored framework for the management of conflict in Africa, especially in the 21st century. The R2P has three major pillars. First, unlike previous interventionist model, the R2P tries to invoke a duty on the state by saying the state has a duty to protect its citizens. Second pillar is that the international community has or should have what it takes to assist the state in achieving that role. Then third, which is inevitable, that should the state fail in that duty, the international community can or will intervene through armed interventions. Although this issue has become controversial, while some other studies have argued that the responsibility to protect looks like a Western doctrine. However, even within the African itself, there have been steps towards addressing these problems of conflict, especially interstate conflict, where civilians have become the major targets of violence. Specifically, Article 4H of the ECOWAS, the AU Constitutive Act, talks about armed interventions in conflicts. Now, within the Cote d'Ivoire crisis, as a result of the unflinching regards for the international community and the regional organizations, the international community had no other choice than to intervene in Cote d'Ivoire. And let's not forget that the pattern of intervention in Cote d'Ivoire was in 3 dimensions. First, the ECOWAS mediation panel attempted to resolve the issue, but it was not yielding fruit due to so many reasons, which will be discussed in the discussions and the other something. Then even the AU, with the African Union Constitutive Act, with the panel of the whites and others, also attempted to persuade Laurent Gbagbo to concede defeat, which he remained adamant. And the international community also, there were also international pressures like asset ban and other things to persuade him to relinquish power, which he refused. So it was obvious that the whole issue was snowballing into what could be seen as another civil war. So in a bid to avoid that, in invoking the responsibility to protect, and taking a clue from what was just happening in Libya, where Resolution 1970 and Resolution 1973 was imposed as a way of putting a halt to the massacre being perpetrated by the Gaddafi regime, I think the Western countries, international community, especially through the UN Security Council, passed Resolution 1975 on March 30. And the resolution had 3 major contents. First, it recognized Alassane Ouattara as the president of Cote d'Ivoire. It also condemned Gbagbo's refusal to step down, and it also authorized the UNOC to adopt all necessary means to protect civilians, which apparently includes prevention of the use of heavy weapons. And eventually, of course, we all know the story. Then within the intervention, Gbagbo was eventually arrested and handed over to the ICC. So what then are the challenges that have been faced within the autopsy in the Cote d'Ivoire? First of all, we have the issue of the lack of political will. In the midst of the interventions, or within the process of the interventions, it was observed, or it is observed, that the absence of political will within the members of the ECOWAS and the AU, in fact, led to a situation whereby they were left with no choice than to accept Western intervention. One. Then also, within the autopsy again, we have what we call the ubiquity of the concept. Even to today, apart from the Libya debacle, the Cote d'Ivoire experience have also exposed the fact that the autopsy is still seriously confronted with the problem of ambiguity of the concept. Ambiguity in the sense that what does autopsy means? What does ROP fight against? And how does autopsy, or how is the autopsy faction to fight against those things, have all continued to bother the whole process. And then not to also forget, which is the main bone of contention in this study, the whole issue of overstretching of the mandate. For example, like in the Libya issue example, I have to take a clue from the Libya, the resolution 1973, which gave armed intervention, or who gave a license for intervention in Libya, there was no way it was stated that Gaddafi should be removed. And coming to the whole issue of Cote d'Ivoire, which is our subject matter, despite the pronouncement of the resolution to intervene in Cote d'Ivoire, there was no way it was still stated that Gbagbo should be removed. Consequently, the whole issue now is just that aside the interventions, it is obvious now that there's still a seeming aspect of liberal Western interventionism which has suggested that there's always an overstretch of the UN security mandate to include regime change, which also protects a dangerous precedence for the autopsy and future elections. And of course, another challenge again is all the issue of operational challenges. For example, in the whole issue of carrying out area bombardment, there was a serious problem of a violation of the law of armed conflict and law of international humanitarian law, in the sense that there was no way they could separate civilian targets from military targets. Hence, the indiscriminate area bombardment meant that what was the situation in Cote d'Ivoire was simply using bombs to enforce human rights. We also have the issue of autopsy as imperialism. Although France shares historical tie with Cote d'Ivoire, shares economic tie with Cote d'Ivoire, but the whole issue of R2P as imperialism has continued to become a lingering issue. Why it is accepted that intervention is a problem when it does not happen, it's also a known fact that intervention is also a problem when it happens. The problem of how to distinguish between liberal imperialism in terms of economic gains and neutral intervention has become a serious problem in Africa. And this also affirms the statement or continues to affirm the arguments of African scholars, especially Zubairu Y, 2004, and Mahmoud Madani in 2009. And also, we also have the whole issue of double standard, because in the course of the intervention, there was a deliberate, or what I will say, there was a taking of sides in the conflict, which ordinarily should not be. The intervening parties or Western countries ought to be neutral in the conflict. They shouldn't in any way take sides in the conflict. Taking sides in the conflict excavates the country in Cote d'Ivoire. And even, for example, let's also digress a bit to the Libyan issue now. We see that the taking of the serious aiding of the NTC rebels, the National Transition Council rebels in Libya, although it aided to the removal of Gaddafi, but it has also complicated the issues in Libya. And it has also led to refugee crisis all around Europe, and also similar issue in Syria. Then, however, what then is the summary about this work? Obviously, within the interventions and everything, no doubt the UN Security Council resolution was timely and swiftly, in the sense that first it tries to affirm the commitment of the responsibility to protect civilians at all costs, right? But however, that is in the short run. But in the long run, the issue of responsibility to protect as regime change still remains a problem. So what then are the summaries? What are the conclusions that could be drawn from this work, or that could be as recommendations? First and foremost, since regional organizations enjoy proximities to these areas of conflict, the R2P need to encourage regional organizations like the AU and the ECOWAS to stand to those challenges. Secondly, regional organizations within themselves have to step up their games. For example, there are beautiful legislative frameworks and judicial frameworks that are available. Like, for example, there's a chapter and there's the African Human Rights Court, and there are also the panel of WISE, and there's also the Baju charters and other charters. These legislative frameworks and judicial frameworks should be seen as, they should be implemented and put as a way of resolving conflict. And thirdly, the whole issue about the African standby force. No doubt there's need to be a technical support, Western support for the African standby force, so as to rise up to the challenges of conflict timely as of when they come up. Then fourthly, again, we also have, there's need for a comprehensive understanding and the context of conflicts before interventions are taking place. And of course, from there, we also lead to what the R2P talks about in the issue of responsibility to react, responsibility to respond, and responsibility to rebuild. No doubt that when interventions have taken place, intervening countries also have a moral duty to help rebuild the societies where they have intervened, so as not to rubbish the responsibility to protect. Then Africa, and more importantly again, there needs to be a broad justice system that would punish those who perpetrated the conflict in Cote d'Ivoire, as well compensate those who suffered from the conflict. Then finally, which is more important, is that although the Cote d'Ivoire has also presented challenges for the responsibility to protect, no doubt we need to increase and our determination to develop better preventive mediation and coercive tools as we operationalize the R2P in future conflicts. Thank you for listening. And once again, I sincerely apologize for not attending the conference. And I do hope that corrections, observations will be noted and will be appropriately fixed where necessary. Thank you.